You've been lied to. Not by politicians, not by priests, not by history books, but by your own brain. It convinced you that reason is part of its design, that intelligence was an evolutionary goal, that logic was always meant to be here, but the truth is simpler, more brutal. The brain doesn't need reason to function. It doesn't even notice when it's gone. Tonight we read chapters 14 and 15, and after this you won't be able to look at thought the same way again. Because here's the reality. The human brain wasn't wired for logic. It wasn't built to construct, analyze, or comprehend. It simply found a way to exploit its own architecture. Your thoughts aren't instructions from the brain, they're side effects. Leftovers. A parasite clinging to neural structures that evolved for entirely different reasons. Nevzorov saw through this. He tore apart every illusion about intelligence, morality, and human nature. That's why this book exists, and that's why I had to translate it. Some texts demand to be shared, some truths refuse to stay locked in one language, and this one had to reach more people. That's why I translated The Origins of Genius and Fascism into American English. That's why you hear it now, because this book was never meant to stay hidden. But Nevzorov is more than just a writer. He's an exile, an outlaw, a voice that refuses to be ignored. One of the first in Russia to stand against the war in Ukraine. One of the first to call it what it was, a genocidal slaughter, while his former colleagues in Russian media bowed their heads and licked the boots of power. Nox isn't just a podcast. This is the first and only English reading of The Origins of Genius and Fascism. A book that doesn't just question human intelligence, it dissects it, exposes it, strips it to the bone. But Nox isn't just me reading, it's a movement. If what you hear hits too close to home, if it lingers in your mind long after the episode ends, don't sit in silence. Comment, share, debate, spread it. Because some things are too important to keep to yourself. Follow Nox. Follow Trickster Collective. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, wherever you get your dose of uncomfortable truths. All links are in the description. If you speak Russian, I strongly recommend subscribing to Alexander Nevzorov's YouTube channel. If you want to buy the original book, you'll find the links in the pinned comment. And if you don't speak Russian, this podcast was made for you. Now let's peel back the skull and see what's rotting underneath. Chapter 14. The Hollow Rights of Reason. Oh yes, to fit reason into the human skull, evolution had to twist and turn, resorting to tricks. To free up even a handful of neurons for this fateful cocktail, it stripped humans of their ability to wiggle their ears, hear ultrasound, and decode complex sense. These abilities were written off. Trading ear wiggling for the Bible and the institution of marriage was, in hindsight, a catastrophic decision. But by the time anyone realized, the experiment was already out of control. Some scraps for this cocktail were scraped together from the subcortical structures, but only just. Yet reason, ever the parasite, learned to make do with leftovers, residual impulses, a handful of cortical connections. Strictly speaking, reason became more of an effect than a fixed trait. The brain was never built by evolution to refine Ptolemy's tables or slip on a condom. It was designed neither for reasoning, thinking, nor intelligence, and certainly not in their best interests. This is why human reason is fragile, why it sways with every fluctuation of physiology. Pain, emotions, sleep, alcohol, each one can cripple, suppress, or completely switch it off. This is also why reason isn't inherited. Every new human must be taught from scratch how to use a toilet. If generational memory could be locked into stable brain structures, it would have been. But reason never found a permanent address in the brain's convolutions. It remained a wanderer, an accidental byproduct of neural chemistry. Some processes, like pancreatic juice secretion, have permanent residency in the brain. Reason does not. And yet, the brain was just large enough to spare a few neural scraps for reason's use. On the principle of residual funding, whatever was left over. Another key point, when a major function is lost, the hemispheres turn to mush. This is especially true for human favorites like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. These diseases obliterate vast neural networks, wrecking everything from fine motor control to bladder retention. The folds of the brain shrink, unravel and rot away, exposing the bare depths of the sulci. It's all logical. If a function disappears, so does the part of the brain that serviced it. This is called atrophy, and it is inevitable. If an animal loses its sense of smell, its olfactory bulbs shrivel and shrink. If it goes blind, the optic nerve withers into a thread, and the optic chiasm fades into a barely detectable trace. But here's the kicker. A complete absence of intellectual activity has no effect on the brain whatsoever. Not even a hint of atrophy. No trace of dystrophy. Nothing. The brain stays neat, compact, and glossy, as if nothing happened. This was precisely the state of the immaculate hemispheres carried by Homo ergaster, Homo erectus, and all other Pleistocene marvel beasts, creatures blissfully ignorant of both integrals and underwear. And it's the same pristine brain that anatomists admire when they examine modern feral children, humans raised without contact with civilization, incapable of anything beyond masturbation and biting. So, blaming the brain for its lack of intellect is another grand idiocy. The brain never promised anything. It never made commitments. It merely does humanity a favor by occasionally sparing a few crumbs of its potential for intellectual amusement. And now, the final act of this cerebral comedy begins. Over time, the brain became a feeding trough for every kind of scientific small fry. Then one day, the small fry forgot to lock the door. And culture crept in. Now, culture has taken up comprehending and exalting the contents of the human skull in its usual style. Loud, illiterate, and completely disconnected from reality. Eventually, culture shoved aside the timid scientists, claimed the brain as its personal domain, and declared itself the brain's best friend. Its only true connoisseur. Everything might have gone smoothly. But unfortunately, the brain itself found out about culture's antics. This is where the fun truly began. The circus was brewing. Our loyal lipid laborer, who had spent its entire existence regulating urination and vomiting, summoning erections, sweating with diligence, toiling in the dark factories of physiology, knew its place. It never even dreamed of playing another role. And then, one day, the brain discovered that it was not a humble worker at all. No, suddenly it was a prince, a thinker, an unsolvable enigma. And, being somewhat dim-witted, it believed it immediately. Yes, indeed. Thanks to culture, the grand master of deception, the brain was granted laurels it had never earned. It became the perfect new idol. In the haze of this intoxication, no one seemed to notice that this very same brain could be fooled by a Bollywood film, reduced to tears or laughter at the flick of a scene. In other words, the brain, something that should be an object of embarrassment, was elevated to the status of an incomprehensible treasure, the greatest mystery of the universe. Poisoned by culture, people began worshipping a fleeting, unanchored side effect as the brain's primary, most sacred purpose. Oh yes, we got carried away. But now it's time to return to the riddle of the blind, crippled freak and his accidental masterpiece. The shadows of the great physiologists howl like air raid sirens, warning of our approach to the threshold of a forbidden topic. At first glance, the situation is indeed perplexing. Let me remind you, the paradox lies in the parasitic mismatch between the creator's capabilities and the result of its creation. Here we have a feeble little brain, and here we have its product. Civilization. A civilization that is considered great. Considered great by whom? Who is this expert who handed down such a high evaluation? Why, it's the very same brain, the one whose capabilities are laughably limited. But there are simply no other experts. Academic science is flesh of the flesh of this brain. It clings nervously to its parents' legs, afraid to contradict it. The circle has amusingly closed in on itself. This would seem hopeless if not for the fortunate existence of drunken diggers and their unique methods of understanding the world. You see, a digger doesn't always remember exactly what he dug up in his alcoholic oblivion. He knows for sure that he dug something, but he has no idea what exactly or where exactly. And yet, the assessment must look plausible. And so, the first law of the drunken digger comes into play. It states that the best way to determine the scale of an excavation is to inspect the tool with which the digging was done. If it was done with a garden trowel, then the excavation was certainly not the Mariana Trench or the Suez Canal. This methodology is perfectly suited for solving our question as well. The law puts everything in its place. Once we have examined and understood the primary tool used to create civilization, we are doomed to reach a conclusion. That so-called magnificent civilization, supposedly created by a feeble brain, is most likely nothing more than a non-magnificent non-civilization. And all the rapturous admiration for it stems from one simple fact. No one has ever seen a real civilization. But there is no reason to make a tragedy out of this. The fact must be accepted calmly, with dignity. In any case, humanity clearly has no chance to compare itself to a truly advanced civilization, nor to comprehend what such a thing would even look like. So, there's no need to worry. Man will forever remain in this self-satisfied ignorance, and that pitiful little brain will ensure that he enjoys every last pathetic moment of it. End of chapter 14. All right, you've just heard the truth. Now let's be real. How do you feel about it? Still convinced that intelligence is some kind of gift? Still clinging to the idea that reason was part of the plan? Or are you starting to see it for what it is, an accident, a side effect, a glitch that just happened to survive? Let that sit for a moment. While we take this break, do me a favor. Make sure you're connected. Follow Knox. Find us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, wherever you get your dose of uncomfortable truths. Now talk about this. Share this episode. Leave a comment, debate, start a fire. Because Knox isn't just a podcast. It's something bigger than that. Time for a quick beat break. Don't go nowhere, because we're just warming up. This is Knox, and we'll be back in a flash.
Katze sitzt mal wieder nicht im Korb. Sie weiß ganz genau, dass sie nicht auf den Küchentisch darf, trotzdem sitzt sie dort. Meine Katze weiß, dass Pizza mir gefällt. Deswegen tut sie so, als wäre sie noch hungrig, trotzdem hab ich nichts bestellt. Meine Katze schläft den lieben langen Tag. Träumt von Mäusen, träumt von Vögeln oder Pizza, als sie in der Küche lag. Meine Katze mag gerne Mitternachtsnacks. Darum hat sie mich dann noch mal wieder liebevoll um 4 Uhr früh geweckt. Meine Katze, meine Katze, meine Katze, meine Katze, meine Katze.
Meine Katze, Mr. Sweatband Remix, by Felix E. and Sister Soul. Damn, that track hits just right. Dark, hypnotic, exactly the kind of pulse that fits Knox. Alright, we're back. And listen, tonight's episode is different. We're diving into 2 full chapters. Yeah, that means it's going to run a little longer than usual, but trust me, you won't get bored. This book, it doesn't let you. Every line cuts, every idea strips away another layer of illusion. And that's exactly why I translated it. I couldn't just read this and walk away. I had to bring it into English, because this book needs to be heard. Now, before we keep going, make sure you're plugged in. Find Knox everywhere. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, wherever you get your dose of uncomfortable truths. And let's not forget who wrote this, Alexander Nevzorov. Not just a writer, a thinker, a public intellectual, a man who doesn't just challenge ideas, he demolishes them. One of the first voices in Russia to stand against the war in Ukraine. Exiled, uncompromising, still tearing apart the myths of civilization with that same relentless precision. And now, you're about to hear his words, raw and unfiltered. So get ready. We're not slowing down, we're going deeper. Chapter 15. The Overfed Chimera. The cortex was never built for knowledge, not for learning, not even for curiosity. It was a glitch, an accidental side effect. Alas, there was no one to inherit it from. The universe is a rather unpleasant place, governed by foolish laws. Here, if you want to possess something, you must inherit it from ancestral forms. This rule applies equally to all matter, including what we call living matter. It's both irritating and absurd that traits cannot be bought or stolen. They can only be passed down through inheritance. Yes, it is certainly possible to develop and expand one's inheritance, or to lose it, but never entirely. It simply goes dormant. What is curiosity? It is the irrepressible drive to trace a chain of events back to its first cause. But animals have no such drive. They have no need to decipher the subtleties of existence. Neither survival nor reproduction depends on knowing the original source of an event. For this reason, there is no brain structure that could initiate the mechanism of causal understanding. Animal indifference is absolute and insurmountable. A hippopotamus does not concern itself with gravity, just as a cynodont has no interest in the aerodynamics of a beetle. Otherwise, the Paleozoic era would have turned into a congress of naturalists, which would have been rather inappropriate in those difficult times. Yes, animals are capable of showing interest, but what is so grandly labeled interest is merely a reflexive focus on changes or movements within the known environment. This interest is nothing more than a probing tentacle of reflex. Unknown stimuli, however, do not trigger reflexes at all. They are either ignored or immediately handed over to the jurisdiction of fear. And this mighty force, this all-powerful indifference, cuts everything with the same blade, rejecting and discarding it all alike. A perfect illustration of this can be found in the crowd of curly-haired fools who climbed aboard the Endeavour, James Cook's ship, in April 1770. They belonged to the Gugu Yimithir tribe. They had never seen a ship before. They had never imagined the existence of clamps, beams, or cannons. Cook had hoped to awe the coastal savages of Australia with the grandeur of naval aesthetics embodied in his 22-gun bark. But the Gugu ignored the anchors, the quarterdeck, the rigging. They remained completely indifferent to the capstans and the ship's wheel. Even the Endeavour's exemplary latrine failed to provoke the slightest flicker of curiosity. To them, there was no ship, even as they wandered its decks. But emotions, intense, primal emotions, were finally triggered. Not by the ship, not by its cannons, not by the great mystery of its existence. No, the Gugu Yimithir lost their minds over the turtles. The ones caught for the sailors' soup. That's when the shrieking, wailing, and dancing erupted. The turtles were inspected from every angle, prodded, slapped, and scrutinized. It's the same with a dog. A sock drenched in the scent of a fertile bitch will be unearthed from 1,000 others. But if the same dog catches a scent it has never encountered before, no matter how sharp, how strange, it won't dig. Not out of fear, not out of caution, simply because it doesn't care. Humanity inherited its brain from a long, unbroken chain of beasts. Along with all its other joys, it also inherited absolute indifference to the mysteries of the world. For millions of years, this disregard was passed down from skull to skull. It settled into the soft folds of Homo sapiens' brain, just as comfortably as it did under the bony foreheads of alligators and seals. That's why humanity spent 1.5 million years blinking dumbly at reality, missing every seductive offer nature laid before it. And to be fair, it had a valid excuse. How could natural curiosity arise when there was nothing to inherit it from? The ancestral chain never possessed it, so there was nothing to pass down. Reason was supposed to change everything, but it didn't. The banquet first served in the Pleistocene continued in Sumeria, then in Egypt. Think about it. Between the first dynasty and the last, Dynasty 31, Egypt's population fluctuated between 30 to 50 million people. And of those, at least 10 million ended up dried, painted, and wrapped, perfectly preserved mummies. What does this mean? First and foremost, it means that teams of Parashis, Tarakutes, and priests of Anubis performed approximately 10 million abdominal dissections on men, women, and children alike. On the bronze dissection tables lay pregnant women at various stages of gestation, the elderly, newborns, and even individuals with rare pathologies and anomalies. You see, Egyptian mummification wasn't just a simple pickling and drying process for human corpses. It was a meticulous disassembly, a complete deconstruction of the body, with every single organ carefully removed, washed, and embalmed. The concentrated natron solution in which a corpse soaked for 40 days would inevitably strip away the skin, hair, and nails. If the brine was particularly strong, it would also dissolve the nipples, the fingertips, the scrotum, the penis, the ears, and even the lips. Sometimes even the outer layers of muscle peeled away. By the end of this soaking and salting process, what remained was a collection of detached parts, a scattered anatomical jigsaw puzzle. And yet every piece had to be reassembled perfectly, because an incomplete corpse would not be admitted to the judgment of Osiris. Even the stripped skin from the soles of the feet had to be preserved, tied up in a pouch like a schoolchild's spare shoes. This ritual was performed daily across the entire civilization for nearly 3,000 years. And here's where we encounter the greatest of all Egyptian mysteries. Something, at first glance, utterly inexplicable. Let's frame the paradox clearly. The Egyptian ritual of corpse preparation lasted an average of 50 days per body. That's 1,200 hours of both action and observation. Let's do the math. 1,200 hours per body. Multiply that by 10 million mummies. That's 12 billion hours. 12 billion hours of hands-on clinical dissection. 12 billion hours spent observing the internal structure of the human body, watching how disease carved its way through organs, linking symptoms to causes. What should have been the result? Precise anatomical atlases, catalogs of illness, pathology, and trauma, with a written language, with specialized priestly castes who did nothing but this, day after day, year after year. Egypt should have been the birthplace of a vast and sophisticated medical science. But nothing. No records, no medical diagrams, no curiosity. The most fundamental mechanism of life, the human body itself, was met with total indifference. And yet, these embalmers, they weren't ascetics. They weren't solemn monks lost in religious trances. They had their pleasures. It was no coincidence that deceased women were only handed over to the parasites once they were well past their prime. You see, these butchers of Anubis had a workshop tradition. Any female corpse that came into their hands was to be raped. To spoil their fun, grieving families kept their daughters and wives at home until rot set in. If we trust that liar Herodotus, maggots in the vulva didn't seem to spoil the sexual appetite of Anubis's priests. But let's be real. The need for medical and sanitary knowledge was dire. This isn't like the steam engine, something you can survive without. This is about relief from agony, from pointless deaths, from disease and festering wounds. More than that, effective medicine is power, it's a commodity. And in a world drowning in suffering, it's more profitable than hippo hide. The ancient Egyptians were a spectacularly sick people. 90% of the population, including the pharaohs, suffered from urinary schistosomiasis. Translation: they pissed blood. Their bodies were playgrounds for rickets, eczema, malaria, and skeletal deformities. And sanitation? A fucking disaster. Take King Tut's grandma, for example. Her hair has survived through the ages, carrying an undeniable truth. Ancient Egypt was crawling with lice. Even after a 40-day herbal bath, embalming, resin soaking, and mummification, her pubic hair still shines with the fossilized remains of countless nits. No doubt medicine existed. Doctors scurried around both Upper and Lower Egypt, muttering incantations, scribbling delirious papyri, and pretending to heal. The most famous among them? The Ebers Papyrus, found stuffed inside the coffin of a long-dead Egyptian doctor. And what does the Ebers Papyrus actually contain? The Ebers Papyrus, 20 meters of pure, unfiltered gibberish rolled into a scroll. Whoever shoved it up a doctor's ass before burying him did exactly the right thing. Every single medical text from ancient Egypt is laughable, without exception. But some parts deserve special attention, especially their methods of pregnancy testing and their beliefs about the heart, eyesight, and menstruation. So let's start with the Egyptian heart. According to these brilliant medical minds, the heart was the primary organ of digestion. Its pulses supposedly pushed dates and beer down into the intestines. This same heart was also responsible for producing tears and, of course, urine. Egyptian doctors were absolutely convinced that men menstruated more frequently than women. And as for blindness, easily cured by either eating a pig's eyes or rinsing the sockets with bat blood. But nothing beats their pregnancy test. Here's how it worked. A smoking brazier was placed under the woman's dress. If she was pregnant, then all the smoke, having no exit, would supposedly remain trapped inside her womb. But if she wasn't pregnant, the smoke was free to travel up her vagina, through her throat, and then exit through her mouth and ears. Any fleeting moment of rational observation would have debunked this insanity instantly. But no. Smoke rising from ears became a dogma of Egyptian medicine, a lasting testament to its mind-boggling stupidity. For 3,000 years, ancient Egypt displayed a blindness so profound that it defies all rational explanation. Despite dissecting millions of corpses, they noticed nothing, made no observations, drew no conclusions. The human body was of zero interest to them. It wasn't an object of study. It wasn't a puzzle to understand. It was just another prop in their cult rituals, a lifeless offering to their gods. Nothing more. The sole concern of Egyptian embalmers? Don the jackal masks. Follow the sacred sequence of incisions. Chant the prescribed hymns. That's it. And it gets worse. These bald-headed butchers weren't just embalming people. They mummified everything. Millions of ibises, cats, crocodiles, falcons, rams, bulls, even baboons. They sliced them open, gutted them, preserved their remains with the same obsessive care. And yet, even after all this, they never noticed the obvious. Their own hands had repeatedly exposed the undeniable truth that all living organisms are connected, that they all share a common ancestry. But Egypt, the land of 1,000 dissections, remained absolutely blind to the fundamental unity of life. The bodies of monarchs and high priestesses were butchered side by side with baboon carcasses and crocodile corpses. The heart of a pharaoh and the heart of a camel were dumped into the same natron brine. The guts of ostriches were entwined with the intestines of noblemen. This was, in the purest form, a hands-on masterclass in comparative anatomy. And yet, somehow, it never sparked a single thought. The kinship between species, the similarity between their bodies, should have been impossible to ignore. The parasites had everything they needed to lay the foundation for real biology, for true comparative anatomy. And yet, ancient Egypt managed to remain utterly indifferent. They ignored the obvious. They cared only for the sacred sequence of spells from the Book of the Dead. Hippos, pharaohs, same difference. All were just raw material for the assembly line of Osiris' final judgment. 12 billion hours of clinical observation, and not a single trace of it remains in medical papyri or healing practices. This miracle of absolute indifference proves, beyond a doubt, that curiosity is completely alien to the raw, unmodified Homo brain. It was not an innate property of the hemispheres. It was a later, artificial invention. The Egyptian condition is an exact mirror of the prehistoric Homo's blind disinterest, his failure to notice, to connect, to analyze. As we can see in Egypt, the core ancestral trait still ruled unchallenged. The overcoming of this indifference had not even begun. Curiosity had not been born. Sure, there was a slow, sluggish accumulation of practical crafts and household tricks. Sure, century by century, small refinements seeped into daily life. But the urge to understand, to seek anything beyond the well-known, never arose. And really, why single out Egypt? Even in the 21st century, Homo still demonstrates the same prehistoric apathy. Even today, the Homo brain doesn't know the taste of truth, and feels no hunger for it. Curiosity doesn't pull Homo along the chain of facts, leading to first causes. It never became the engine of thought. If curiosity were a true, unstoppable need for knowledge, then ignorance would be impossible. Every single human being on Earth would be deeply fluent in quantum mechanics, cosmology, evolutionary biology, and every fundamental law of existence. Not knowing would be out of the question, because if curiosity were a natural, insatiable drive, it could only end where the facts end. Nowhere sooner. The pursuit of truth, of understanding the essence of things and events, couldn't simply stall halfway or grind to a halt at fairy tales about gods. If curiosity were a biological imperative, another built-in need, it would be as absolute as hunger, fear, and thirst. It would automatically push every single being toward constructing the most complete and precise picture of reality. One thing is clear. If curiosity were truly a property of the brain, it would inevitably drive every human toward an understanding of life's structure. even against their will, the process of learning would be unstoppable. A shark cannot simply turn off its ampullae of Lorenzini. A firefly cannot decide to stop lighting up its ass. These are global properties of their organisms, an inescapable part of their nervous systems. A shark will always, everywhere, detect the faintest electric impulses. A firefly is doomed to glow, even when it has absolutely no desire to do so. And so, Homo would have been forced to learn, constantly without pause. Knowledge would have burned religion and art to the ground. It would be laughable to cultivate outright stupidity, or even to preserve it as some quaint little artifact. The knowledge of how the world really works mercilessly strips away the illusions of culture, and shuts down any interest in them. No Dante with his idiotic circles of hell. No Trinities, no Buddhas. A brain wired with even the most basic curiosity wouldn't cry over TV dramas. It wouldn't chase Giordano Bruno with a pack of matches. If curiosity were an actual hostile force, it would have radically altered the entire shape of civilization. The world would look nothing like what we see today. What we have now? It's exactly what an animal would create. An animal that was simply handed the ability to secure its needs for food, reproduction, murder, entertainment, and other basic nervous system stimulants. But we can see how brutally the Pleistocene principle still rules. An animal only wants to know what it already knows. It's only willing to absorb information that fits within its pre-existing stimuli, aligns with its mental orbit, and serves its designated social role. And nothing beyond that. Everything else? Just as meaningless as the structure of a liver to an Anubis priest. And the worst part? Ignorance doesn't hurt. It doesn't make life unbearable. It doesn't feel like a tragedy. Hell, it doesn't even register as discomfort. Humans devour lies with gratitude, swallowing any bullshit fed to them, just like the ancient Egyptians, happily chewing on the counterfeits handed down by religion, culture, and tradition. Yes, the word curiosity exists. It's firmly planted in human vocabulary. It's even hailed as the engine of progress. But human progress? That's just another well-fed chimera. Well then, where the fuck are the results? What kind of progress can we even talk about when 99% of the human population still believes in gods, spirits, souls, and remains obedient to dictators? The truth is, what people call curiosity is not a drive to uncover the essence of things or phenomena. It's just the primitive search for familiar stimuli. Yes, Homo has developed a set of known interests, a small, well-defined club of urges, and it hasn't grown for millennia. A novel reader is no different from a male dog rummaging through old socks. Like any other animal, Homo is willing to dig through the laundry pile of reality, but only when drawn by the familiar sense of sex, money, property, power, or entertainment. This has nothing to do with curiosity or a thirst for knowledge. The true instigator of all human searching is simple physiology, coupled with the same set of primitive reflexes that were honed by synapsids. Of course, all of Homo's ancestors perfected these reflexes in the real world. To taste the thrill of killing, one had to actually kill. To understand love, one had to hear the roar and feel the convulsions of an orgasmic female. But culture changed everything. Now it allows Homo to love without even unzipping his pants. It took blood, fear, and ecstasy and compressed them into words and pixels. And the brain? The brain was dumb enough to believe it. Unfortunately, the time has come to say goodbye to the myths of curiosity and intellectual hunger. It's not the most pleasant news, but there's no need for tragedy either. It's irreversible. The brave thing to do is simply accept it. The natural drive toward knowledge? It does not exist. That much is clear. And yet curiosity does exist. It is an exceedingly rare trait. Within the vast population of Homo, its percentage is so minuscule that it can't even be measured. After all, Galileo, Bohr, and the other scientific hounds weren't chasing familiar sense. They were sniffing out something completely unknown. Their drive cannot be explained by physiology. But if curiosity is not an innate function of the brain, then where the hell did it come from? Where did it arise in Volta, Swammerdam, and the so-called geniuses of history? From the same place that a dog gets its desire to seek out objects that hold no personal interest for it. Shellac and soot hold no promise of food or sexual pleasure for a dog. And yet, under the right circumstances, a dog will passionately hunt down a boot polish made from these very components. The catch? That dog has simply undergone a specialized training course. Human curiosity is no different. It too is trained. The only difference? The training of scientists is far more intensive and far longer than that of a German shepherd or a Gambian rat trained to sniff out landmines. Within the human population, there are lap dogs, guard dogs, and trained bloodhounds, each filling its assigned role. In other words, curiosity is just a profession, nothing more. And yet, even in such a pathetic artificial form, in this farcical, accidental spectacle that we call human progress, at least a few things have been sniffed out. End of chapter 15. And here we are, Homo sapiens, the accident, the glitch, the scavenger ape that stumbled into reason and never recovered. It wasn't intelligence that shaped the species, it was terror. It was impulse. It was the blind mechanics of survival. The mind wasn't built for thought, it wasn't designed for logic. It was wired to feed, to fight, to fuck, to run. And yet, here we are, trapped inside a brain that wasn't meant for any of this, overstimulated, overloaded, drowning in a flood of thoughts that never stop. The grand lie of intelligence is simple. It didn't elevate man, it didn't free him. It infected him. It made him neurotic. It made him afraid. It made him desperate for meaning in a world that doesn't offer any. And so he clings to illusions. He tells himself stories. He builds civilizations, not out of progress, but out of fear of the unknown. He creates gods, not out of faith, but because he can't handle the silence. And now he's locked inside his own hyperactive mind, searching for purpose, searching for truth, searching for something, anything to justify his existence. You feel it, don't you? That itch in the back of your skull? That suspicion that nothing around you is real, that everything you've been told since birth is a carefully constructed lie. But you're not crazy. You're just awake. Most people spend their lives suppressing that feeling, drowning it out with noise, but not you. You're here. You're listening. You're thinking. And that means there's no going back. This book changed me. I didn't just read it, I had to translate it. I had to pull it into English so that more people could see what civilization really is. Nevzorov didn't just write a book, he dissected the grand illusion of intelligence, of progress, of human nature itself, and he didn't stop there. He speaks out every single day against Russia's brutal war in Ukraine. He dismantles the lies of power, of propaganda, of the criminal empire built on blood and silence. His voice is dangerous, his truth is uncompromising, and today you can hear it unfiltered on his official YouTube channel. This is the kind of voice they fear, and if they fear it, it means we should listen. Welcome to the virus. Welcome to thought infection. Welcome to Nox. We don't do comfort. We don't do safe. We do raw. We do real. We do truth. Ugly, unfiltered, and uncut. So either you spread it or you stay blind. Your call. Ain't no cure for that, baby. Nox is everywhere. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Amazon Music. All links are in the episode description. This episode will not go unnoticed. Watch, listen, think, spread, and never forget. In night we trust.